will go from there.
So Brother Mike, he's teaching another class right now? Is he in another class?
No, Tommy is teaching the class.
Oh, he was in another room.
No, he was just in there studying, I think.
Oh, okay.
That's what we're gonna be at for,
In our last class, we studied 1 Samuel 15. At least we got down to that and got down to verse about 18. I want to start tonight's class by, I think I've said this before. If I haven't, I want to say it anyway. Paul says in Romans 15:4 that the things that were written before time were written for our learning. And as we study these things in the Old Testament, they're not just a bunch of stories. They're good stories, but they're I believe that we have the responsibility to learn the lessons. Paul says there's something back here that we can learn, and I believe it's our responsibility to do that. And as I said last class, that 1 Samuel 15 is one of the most powerful parts of the Bible that, especially in the Old Testament, that teaches the need of obedience, what obedience is and what it is not, and what the results is if one does not obey. So we're going to go back and just touch lightly the first 17 verses, and then we're going to get to verse 18 and work and see what we can learn from this. God told Samuel to tell Saul to go down and utterly destroy the Amalekites. We talked about utterly last time. And he says you go down and you kill them all. You don't spare any of them. In case he didn't understand, he said, but kill both man and woman and infant, and nursing child, ox and sheep, camel and donkey. That just about took in everything that that had breath in it, I suppose.
anything living.
Yeah, so it didn't leave much. So Saul gathered the people down, and he went down, and he besieged, or at least he made war against Amalek, and he was victorious. But we're told that he also, verse 8, he took Agag, king of the Amalekites, alive and utterly destroyed all the people with the edge of the sword. But we're told Saul and the people spared Agag and the best of the sheep and the oxen and so forth, and they were unwilling to utterly destroy them. And then we're told that they did this so that they could come back and offer sacrifice to the Lord in verse 15. Now when Samuel comes, Saul says, I have obeyed the command of the Lord. And Samuel said, if you've obeyed the command of the Lord, why do I hear cattle lowing and sheep bleating? Which, as one fellow says, dead sheep don't bleat, and dead cows don't low. But Samuel says, well, I've done what I was told to do. And then in verse 18, where we want to start tonight, Samuel says, now the Lord sent you on a mission, and said, and he repeats what God had told him to do, go and utterly destroy the sinners, the Amalekites, and fight against them until they are consumed, utterly destroyed, or whatever. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord? Why did you swoop down on the spoil and do evil in the sight of the Lord? Now, Saul's answer to this is, even though we see that it is so wrong, we hear people make the same kind of argument today. He says, I have obeyed the voice of the Lord and gone on a mission, and on which the Lord sent me, and brought back Agag, king of Amalek, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. Well, now here's a contradictory statement. if he had utterly destroyed the Amalekites, Agag wouldn't be alive. Agag was an Amalekite.
Right.
And then he says, but the people. Now, in verse 9, it tells us that the people and Saul. But now he says it was the people. He said, but the people, but I have, well, let me see. Yeah, verse 21. But the people took of the plunder, sheep and oxen, the best of things which should have been utterly destroyed. Notice he admitted that it should have been utterly destroyed. And they brought them to sacrifice to the Lord your God in Gilgal.
So he's a tattletale now.
He passed the buck.
Yeah,
It was them.
he later is going to say, well, I did all this because I feared the people. But here is one of those things, you know, there are people today who say, well, we have done all of this. We go to church on Sunday, we do this and we do that, but they don't obey God. There's a thing that comes on Facebook quite frequently, at least my Facebook, and it talks about the Mormon church, and that the Book of Mormon can help you live a so much better life because it's another testament of Jesus Christ. Now that's a lie, and you know they just like Saul knew that he had not done what God said. People lie about things, and we cannot. One commentator made this statement, and I agree with him, that we cannot let actions and rituals take the place of obedience. Now, if God had wanted sacrifice, he could have told them. In fact, over in the 50th Psalm, God said, I'm calling Israel to judgment, I'm calling the people to judgment. And he says, if I were hungry, and in the course of that, he said, if I were hungry, I wouldn't tell you. If you think that I'm wanting sacrifices because I'm hungry, he said, the world is mine and the cattle on 1,000 hills. The world and everything belongs to me. So here we find that excuses, or even if it is sincerely said, which I have strong doubts if it was with Saul, because Saul had already turned rather wicked, but excuses or for not doing something doesn't make it right. I'll put it that way. Or substituting for something, or doing something like as we hear people, I've heard people say that we need to do something for the Lord. Well, what do we need to do for the Lord? We do need to do something for the Lord, but what is it we need to do? What he has commanded us to do. Nothing more and nothing less. And so here we find an example of a man that was given a command of God directly by a prophet of God, and he did not obey that command. And he made the excuse, we brought them back to sacrifice. And here is where Samuel makes that statement that when I teach this in other areas, or when I teach in the preacher training school, they have to memorize this. Has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. And then he says, for here's the reason of all of this. Rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is as iniquity and idolatry. So Samuel, giving the word of God on this, says that your actions of bringing Agag back, yours and the people's actions of bringing or sparing the best of the flocks and the herds, he says this is equal to rebellion. It is equal to witchcraft, stubbornness, iniquity, and idolatry. And because, here he says in verse 23, because you have rejected. Now, look at the difference in this statement and Saul's statement in verse 20. Here in verse 20, Saul said to Samuel, but I have obeyed the voice of the Lord. And Samuel says, but you have rejected the word of the Lord. Now, did he obey some of the things? Yes. He went down, he utterly destroyed everybody but Agag. Those things that were sick, they didn't bring any of the sick and maimed animals back to offer. But even when they brought them back, they didn't intend to take them for themselves. They were going to offer them. But in the whole of it, Samuel says, you have rejected the word of the Lord, and he also has rejected you from being king. Now, at this point, Samuel is pretty much through with Saul. Saul has been rejected by God, and thus Samuel goes in with that rejection. And then in verse 24, Saul tries to make up. He says, then Saul said to Samuel, I have sinned, for I have transgressed the commandment of the Lord and your words, because I feared the people and obeyed their voice. Now, was that the reason?
No.
It just doesn't make sense that it's the reason. And his own words, when he says that I have obeyed and this, but he tries to pass it off on the people, and the people were wrong by wanting to bring the things back, because you don't sacrifice things to God that God hasn't authorized you or commanded you to sacrifice. This is one thing that we need to understand in the church today, as well as in religion, that God he gives commands. He doesn't, in his words, say that you shall not do this, that, and the other. He doesn't have a thou shalt not. In the law, he had 10 commandments, some of them thou shalt, and some of them thou shalt not. But when God told them that they were to offer, use the fire of the altar, or the fire that was sanctified, to burn incense at the altar of incense, he did not say you don't get your fire from somewhere else. He just said that's the place.
Right.
And when God said sing in the New Testament, I know that there are people who laugh at this and ridicule it, but nonetheless, God said in worship every time in the New Testament that he deals with worship, in the music of the worship, he says sing. He did not say don't play. He didn't have to when he specified it. When God said you bring back nothing, he didn't have to specify the sheep, the oxen, and so forth. He said you destroy everything, and so he didn't have to say don't bring it back, because if they had obeyed that, they would not have had to worry about bringing it back.
That's like when you were a kid and your mom sent you to the store, go get a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
She don't have to say, don't bring back donuts.
Right, right. And I used this illustration in the class the other day, that you take a wife says to her husband, go bring us, go to the store and get me a loaf of bread. He's free to bring back anything he wants, so bread and any kind of bread. But if the wife says, I want, go bring me a loaf of cinnamon raisin bread. Now, if my wife tells me to go to the store and get a loaf of bread, I know she doesn't have to tell me don't get bananas and don't get all this, but she said bread. But I look at that bread counter and it's got all kinds of bread, so I'm free to take any or all of it. home with me. But if she tells me cinnamon raisin bread, then I am not authorized to bring home anything but cinnamon raisin bread. I can't, when I get home and with the donuts or some other kind of rye bread with seeds in it, which is my favorite kind of bread, I can't say, well, you didn't say for me not to get donuts. You didn't say not to get a bag of, cookies and so forth. God doesn't have to say that. When God specifies, that settles it. So he said, I have sinned. Now therefore, please pardon my sin and return with me that I may worship the Lord. But first of all, Samuel doesn't have the authority to pardon the sin that he sinned against, that Saul sinned against God. God has to do that. So Samuel said, I will not return with you, for you have rejected the word of the Lord. How dare you? And you can. The Lord's not going to accept your worship now. And so he says you've rejected, and he has rejected you from being king over Israel. You mean just because, here's, if we play the devil's advocate a little bit, you mean just because Saul didn't kill Agag, and because the people and Saul brought back the best of the flocks, which they intended to offer to God for sacrifice, you mean to tell me that God will take the kingdom away from the man that he had anointed? Yep. That's what it says, and that's what he did. And then as Samuel turned around to go away, Samuel said, I'm not going with you. Saul seized the edge of his robe, and it tore. So Samuel said to him, and Samuel uses this as a illustration, the Lord has torn the kingdom of Israel from you today and has given it to a neighbor of yours who is better than you. And also the strength of Israel will not lie nor relent, for he is not a man that he should relent. In other words, God has said that the kingdom is taken away from you, and he's not going to change his mind on that. That he's not one that can be persuaded to change his mind or change his will when people have rebelled. Now, that doesn't mean that we can't pray to God and that God will hear our prayer and do. But if we do, we have to be those people that are trying to be righteous. The ears are open. God's ears are open to the prayers of the righteous, but the prayers of a sinner or a person like that, the one who doesn't respect God, is an abomination to God. And then verse 30, he said, I have sinned, yet honor me now, please, before the elders of my people and before Israel, and return with me that I may worship the Lord your God. Notice, it's not the Lord my God. It's the Lord your God. But we find that a lot of times by people who don't want to recognize God. He's your God. And then Samuel turned back after Saul, and Saul worshiped the Lord. And Samuel said, and notice it doesn't say that Samuel worshipped this point. Saul worshipped. What he did, we're not told, but it says that he worshipped the Lord. And then Samuel said, bring Agag, king of the Amalekites, here to me. And you can just imagine the feeling of Agag. All of his people are dead, but he was saved, so he thinks he's going to make it. So Agag came to him cautiously, and Agag said, surely the bitterness of death is past. But Samuel said, as your sword has made women childless, so your mother so shall your mother be childless among women. And Samuel hacked Agag in pieces before the God or the house before the Lord in Gilgal. Can you picture that in your mind? Hacking in pieces. Now it was in Old Testament times that if a person were caught doing something that was wrong, they'd cut their hands or their feet off, something like that. But here it says they hacked him. I see, and Samuel is doing the hacking. It doesn't say that he used a servant to do this. That he just hacked him. I would imagine he maybe hit him here and he hit him on the back and hit him on the side of the head and maybe decapitated him. I don't know. But
it sounded like he just beat him with the sword.
Just chopped him up.
Stabbed him.
Samuel had the anger of the Lord on with him.
It reminded me of one of those horror movies. You see those slasher movies, those horror movies.
Yeah.
Where they slashing people.
Yeah, it's not a pretty sight.
Yeah.
Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house at Gilboa of Saul, and Samuel went no more to see Saul until the day of his death. So this cuts it with Saul and Samuel. Samuel does not go again all till he's dead, and then we will come on a little bit later, and we'll find that it's in the chapter 16 that Saul goes to a witch or a medium and has her bring Samuel up, and that's some interesting reading just to think about it. Try to think about what it was and how God allowed that woman. She had no power, but how he allowed her to have that power just so that Samuel could give Saul one last statement. And so let's read. First of all, chapter 16 starts out with David being anointed king. Now, David, we're going to read later on that he was anointed king of Judah, but it was sometime later, about 6 years later, before he was anointed king of all of Israel. But here, it is a private anointing. It's not a public one. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, seeing I have rejected him from reigning over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and go. I am sending you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided myself a king among his sons." Now, God doesn't say which one, and he's going to go through several of them, and Samuel thinks each one of them, well, this should be the one that he'll choose, but he doesn't do it. But Samuel sort of argues with God. He doesn't argue, but he knows the situation. If Saul knows that Samuel is going to anoint somebody else king, making a trip to do that, Saul's going to have him killed. Because Saul has already proven himself that he is not trustworthy anymore. So Samuel said, "How can I go?" This is verse 2. "If Saul hears it, he'll kill me." But the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Then invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. You shall anoint for me the one that I name you." So Samuel did what the Lord said. That's, to me, a refreshing statement in the midst of all of this, that where people were not doing what the Lord said, Samuel did. Samuel was true from the time that God first contacted him in the house of Eli, or in the tabernacle, till the day of his death. So as they went to Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled at his coming and said, "Do you come peaceably?" In other words, you are they recognized that Samuel was now the prophet of God, and if Samuel placed something, I don't like to call it a curse, but if Samuel said, the Lord said that this is going to happen to you, it happens, and God listens to it. So he said, I'm here peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, set yourselves apart. And God had given means or instructions as to the sanctifying of oneself. And come with me to the sacrifice. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. And so it was when they came, he looked at Eliab and said, surely the Lord's anointed is before him. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not look at the outward appearance or at his physical stature, because I've refused him. Now here's a lesson that we need to learn. We need to learn this lesson in that the fact that God is no respecter of persons, and people that we think may be great Christians and servants of God, they may not be at all. Mm-hmm. And they may be just putting on airs, as my mother used to say. And then he says, for the Lord does not see as man sees, for man looks at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Now, that is a true statement in more than one way. The Lord looks on the heart, but you and I can't do that. Mm-hmm. I don't know what's in your heart. I know what you say is in your heart. I know that I've known you, I'm just talking about not you particularly, but anyone. I can even say to my wife, I don't know everything that's in your heart. How are you with the Lord? Are you being hypocritical? The Pharisees were hypocritical. Mm-hmm. How does one look on the heart? Only God can do that. We can look on the outward appearance, but that's how we have to make our judgments. You take in the choosing of elders, a lot of times, who are the ones that are chosen to be elders, or they put up to be elders? Maybe they're big businessmen. Maybe they are people with a lot of money or a lot of education or what. And yet that farmer that has a 10th grade education and is doing his farm work and is a faithful Christian, he may be far more acceptable to the Lord than that fellow who's a millionaire. And it's not wrong to be rich. I'm not saying that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes we judge people by the car they drive, by the house they live in, and sometimes by the color of their skin or the tint of their skin and so on. And that's just not right. Mm-hmm. It's just not right. I worked in the congregation. I'm not going to get into that too much, but I worked in the congregation where one man came to the elders and said, "I'm going to have to. I want to become a millionaire, but I'm going to have to pull some shady deals," he said, in order to do it. And he was our song leader, so he said, "Don't call on me to lead singing or in prayer or on anything else until I notify you again that I'm ready to start back again."
Oh boy!
And you know, the sad thing is about that, those elders said, "Okay." They didn't rebuke him. They didn't try to show him differently. And when he did it, they didn't withdraw from him. But here he was. Now he's a millionaire. And
well, you think they were thinking about the finances, or because it?
But you know, even that is fallacious thinking.
Oh, of course. Of course.
You can't substitute righteousness or money for righteousness. Mm-hmm. But it's just here, God looks on the heart. God sees you in a different way than I can see you. because he has the ability. I don't have the ability. God sees me in a different way than you can see me, because I can be the biggest hypocrite in the state of Georgia. I like to think that I'm not, but the religious leaders in Jesus' day, they were hypocrites, and Jesus gave one of the most scathing rebukes of his ministry in Matthew chapter 23 to the religious leaders. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. So, anyway, Jesse called Abinadab, made him pass before Samuel. He said, neither has the Lord chosen him. He made Shammah pass by, and neither did he choose that one. And Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. And Samuel said to Jesse, the Lord has not chosen these. Now, at this time, that would tell us that Jesse had 8 sons, wouldn't it? 7 of them have passed through, and he didn't. Samuel didn't choose, or the Lord didn't choose. But there's one more. But now we're going to read later on that David had many more. Well, David had, not Jesse, but David had many sons, other than just Solomon and Absalom and so on. But anyway, and Samuel said to Jesse, are all the young men here? Then he said, there remains yet a younger, or the youngest, and he's out there keeping the sheep. And you can almost, I guess I read something into that that's not there, but he's just a kid. He keeps the sheep. You don't need to see him. But and Jesse would not, discount his son, but however old David was, he's the youngest. He was the one that tended the flocks. And what can you do with one like that as far as king? It didn't, what we might say, it didn't really make sense in this, but God said do it, and that made it make sense. And so Samuel said, bring him in, for we will not sit down to eat till he comes. So he sent and brought him in, and now he was ruddy with bright eyes and good looking. And the Lord said, arise and anoint him, for he is the one. Now, what does the word ruddy mean? Now, to give you an idea, there are scholarly comments on this that says that he was a flush of face, or that he was a good-looking young man, and it tells us that, and he probably had a good face, cheekbones and all, and that he was bright eyes. Now, one says that means he was blue-eyed, and the ruddy means that he would have red hair. Well, now, maybe the Hebrew says that in some of them, but that's not what I get. Here's a young man, robust. He would have to look like he'd been working, because he'd been out with the flocks and sunburn, or in the wintertime, when the cold. But anyway, this is the one God said, I want him, anoint him, for he's the one. Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the midst of his brothers. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon David from that day forward. So Samuel arose and went to Ramah. He went back home. Now, this is not known to Saul at all. And I'm pretty sure, even though we're not told in so many words, unless I've missed it, that Jesse told the family, now don't you go out and tell this, because could be people laugh at you, or if it's known by Saul that Samuel has anointed David, that Saul will kill him. Could be would told them, no, don't you people, don't you other older brothers mistreat him because he is God's chosen. Whatever, whatever fatherly advice, but whatever it was, Samuel went on home. He did what God told him to do. And then we're told something about Saul. He has some problems. He says that he had a distressing spirit, but the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul, and a depressing or distressing spirit from the Lord troubled him. And Saul's servant said, surely a distressing spirit of God is troubling you. Let our master now command your servants who are before you to seek out a man who is skillful, player of the harp, and it shall be he will play it with his hand when the distressing spirit from God is upon you, and you shall be well. Any thoughts on that, dude? When you're tired or when you don't feel good, if you listen to just, my two favorite kinds of music is easy listening, the old big band era back in when I grew up, and then the old country western. I don't care so much for the lyrics, but I like the melodies of the songs and the country music instruments, the sound of steel guitar and so forth. And I can, many times when I'm doing some of my deep study, I have tape or something on very low volume, and I just hear it in the background, and I can study like that. Well, so that's what they're saying here. That's what his servants are saying. Maybe you get a fellow in here skillful with a harp. Now, I don't know if this harp is I've seen drawings, a little handheld harp that he's got here and that he plucks on, or if it's like the big harp that just sits on the floor and somebody is doing it. I know harp music to me is pretty. I enjoy it. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, now, I understand in verse 14, the Spirit of the Lord departed from Saul. They're saying, but it says an evil spirit from the Lord. Explain the evil spirit.
That question comes up on many occasions. It like when Isaiah or something, God said, "Whom shall I send?" And finally, a lying spirit said that he was going. God sent him. It seems to me in cases like this that God is not purposely doing this, but he is allowing it. There are many things that God allows that he doesn't command. He allows it. In fact, in Paul's letters to the church at Thessalonica, in one place there, he says that if a person doesn't believe that God will send him a lie so that he'll believe and be damned. God doesn't make people do this, but he allows them to do this. I look at our world today. I don't know if God is punishing us in America or not. I don't know if he's punishing other people by allowing, or by these people who are Islamic people who are so vicious, at least the ones that make the news. I don't know about the little Islamic girl. There's a checker out there at Walmart, but these folks that are bombing and decapitating and so forth, God uses such people to punish his people. You look at Babylon, you look at Assyria, you look at Babylon, you look at Persia, you look at Greece, all of them idolatrous nations, and God purposely used them to teach his people a lesson. So as to your question, where there's this, that the distressing spirits from the Lord troubled him, the only thing I can say is that God allowed this to happen. Whether he sent a distressing spirit, but he at least allowed it. And that's the best I can do on it. I will do some more research on that, see what else I can find. In fact, I'll write that down. And I'll look that up next week, see what I can find on it. And but anyway, says in verse 18, then one of the servants answered and said, look, I have seen the son of Jesse, a Bethlehemite, who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a man of war, prudent in speech, and a handsome person, and the Lord is with him. Boy, you can't get much better than that, can you? Look at that. He is skillful in playing. In other words, he has taken the time to learn. He is a mighty man of valor. Well, how do we know this? Well, David himself says when he was tending the sheep that a bear came and a lion came and took a lamb out of the flock, and he killed both of them, bare-handed. And he's prudent in speech. That means he didn't talk out of turn. He used good speech. He was a handsome person. Well, up here it says he was good looking in verse 12. And the Lord was with him. So what better commendation could you get? Therefore Saul sent messengers to Jesse and said, send me your son David, who is with the sheep. And Jesse took a donkey and so on, and he sent David to Saul. Now think about what you've got here. You've got a king, one that is serving as king, that he's been told his kingdom has been taken away from him, that he's not going to, none of his sons are going to inherit the kingdom. And now you have him and then the fella that's going to replace him. Oh, they're together. One has almost seems to have insanity traits, and one is trying to console him. So David came to Saul and stood before him, and he loved him greatly, and he became his armor bearer. So at the beginning, you know that Saul doesn't know anything about David because he loved him greatly, but that's going to change. Saul is going to learn to hate David. And so Saul sent to Jesse and said, I'm going to keep him here with me. And he says to Jesse, let him stay, but you don't say no to the king. So Jesse let David stay. And then we come to one of those places in the Bible that if you need to teach a little child about heroes and so forth, here it is. The Philistines, they were the major enemy of Israel during Saul and David's reign, but especially with Saul. The Philistines gathered their army to battle and were gathered at Socoh, which belongs to Judah, and they encamped between Socoh and Azekah, and these other names. And Saul and his men of Israel were gathered together. They camped in the valley of Elah and drew up battle array against the Philistines. Now, this is south of Bethlehem, south of Jerusalem, but there is a sort of a swell in the land. There's like the rolling hills of here in Georgia, where you go down and then you go back up, and maybe there's a creek down there or something. Well, this is what it was here. I had been there, and as a kid, I thought of being up on a high mountain, on one high mountain and one on the other. But they didn't need high mountains to gather for war, because they, as we said in our last lesson, their armament or their weapons of war would be either slings or arrows or spears and swords. That's about it. And then you can only sling a stone so far and shoot an arrow so far. So if you're out of ways, but anyway, they were about probably one was up on this just a little hill here, and it came down, and down here was a stream, or is a stream. Well, it's dry now, but then you came up over here, and maybe it's 300 yards at the most between them, which it would be not too many people could shoot an arrow 300 yards or sling a slingshot. But anyway, they're there, and this giant comes out, a champion, went out from them. This verse 4, named Goliath from Gath. His height was 6 cubits in a span, about 9.5 feet. I don't think I've ever seen a 9 foot. Are any of our basketball players, have any of them been 9 feet? There've been some 6 and 7 feet, maybe even an 8 footer, but I don't think I've ever seen 9 footer.
I think Manute Bol was, I think he was 7'9".
Yeah.
Remember him? He played in the 80s for the Sixers, and he played for a number of teams. He was from Africa.
Yeah.
And he was taller.
Yeah, I remember him. I didn't know his name, but I know he was from Africa, and he didn't play well, but he could stand back there at the goal and they'd throw him the ball and he'd just drop it over.
Yeah.
So but anyway, this fella's one big man, and he had a bronze helmet. Well, first of all, he had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of bronze. And that coat of mail, it's like the old movies of the English having that, that coat of mail, woven strands of steel or whatever. But his staff, the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam.
What did you say, the coat of mail?
A coat of mail is, it says here it was brass, but it would be where it would be rolled out and then it would be woven, almost like you braid hair, but
woven brass.
Yeah, or cut in little chunks and then sewn together. Yeah, it's something like that. Just little pieces, maybe half of something about like that, or even half of that, and then it would be put together all around and overlapping one another. So it would stop.
I remember that from the movie.
Yeah, it would stop the sword and it would stop an arrow. The arrow couldn't go through it. So here he is, and then he's got this big old spear. You know what a weaver's beam is? I didn't either, and one of my trips into India, we took a day and we went over to the border of Bangladesh. We were in northern India, and over on the way there was a weaving factory that wove cloth and so forth. They didn't particularly like us coming in, but they said that we weren't allowed to take pictures, but they let us come in and look. It was dark because they didn't have any electricity. It was all run by manpower. But it's when they pull this loom down, and then they throw this thing in between there, and then they push it back up, and it's a weaver's beam that they told me, and it's a pretty good sized thing. But that's what I think of now when I think of a weaver's beam. It'd be a piece of wood that this big old spear or this big head was on the spearhead weighed 600 shekels, and the shield bearer went before him. Then he stood and cried out, the armies of Israel, and said to them, why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you are servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and come down. And then he kept doing this. And in verse 10, he said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And then it goes on into the story. I'm not going to read it all. And but it says in verse 16 that the Philistines drew near, or this Philistine drew near, and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. So twice a day he'd come out and he'd challenge somebody. And in the meantime, Jesse had told his son David to take his brothers who were in Saul's army, and they were at this place, and said, take them some food. And when they came there, David's brother accused him of mischief, of just wanting to come to the battle. But anyway, when it says, when Goliath, and then as he talked with them, that David's talking about, or it's talking about David talking with his brothers, there was the champion Goliath, or the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines. He spoke according to the same words, so David heard him. So the men of Israel said, how have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills the king kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, give his father's house exemption from taxes. Then David spoke. Now David is there, and his brothers have chided him about being able to see the battle. But he said to the men who stood by them, what shall be done for the man? And they told him again. And he says, for who is this uncircumcised Philistines, that he should defy the armies of the living God? Now that is a thing here that I think we need to take to heart. Who is someone out here that should defy Christians? Mm-hmm. Now, we're not going to go out and kill people, but we should not be afraid. We're down in verse 26. We should not be afraid when somebody wants to debate. And nowadays, nobody wants to. But back in the Restoration period of time, 150 years ago or so, it wasn't the Christians who were wanting to debate. It was the denominational people wanting to debate, because Christians were going forth and converting half of it was the fastest growing religion in America at the time. And so the denominational people wanted to debate, and when they debated, they lost. There's never a debate, that's on record anyway, where it was a Christian debating and a denominational person, that the denominational person could be said to have won the debate. There was one that was close, because the debater didn't prepare himself. He knew better, but he just didn't prepare himself. But other than that, it's truth is going to stand. Who was it said? Maybe it was a fellow with Huckleberry Finn or whatever. But if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember what you said. And if you tell the truth, if you teach the truth, learn the truth, then you don't have to be afraid of anybody that's going to teach error. So Eliab, in verse 28, Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and his anger aroused against David. He said, why do you come down here, and with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride, and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. And David said, what have I done now? It's almost like I used to say to my brother, what have I done now? That's just so critical. Is there not a cause? Now, when there is a cause, I think we need to learn this. Like when there is a cause, we need to step up to the cause if we have the ability. Right now, of course, I think I've told you this, but right now, my wife and I are planning to go back to India in the last of September, and we're going to stay till the 1st of March, 5 months, because there's a cause there. I'm not some big time, big name preacher, but I do have the ability to go, and I have the ability to teach people how to teach or how to preach the truth, and that's what I'll be doing. And then the words were spoken to Saul, and what David said were reported to Saul, and David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. And Saul says, okay, but you take my armor. David, after trying it, he said, I can't use this armor. And so he tells Saul about when he was a younger man in the sheepfold, or out with the sheep. When a lion came, he killed it barehanded. So when a bear came, he killed him. And he said, I will take care of this Philistine that's giving problems. And he said in verse 37, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. And Saul said to David, go and do it. And then so Saul said, take my armor. And David said, I can't, I haven't proven it. And then I'm trying to look to get, in verse 40, he took his staff in his hand, and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from the brook. That's that creek or that brook on these 2 sides. And he put them in the shepherd's bag and his pouch, and his sling was in his hand, and he drew near the Philistine. And little boys like to hear this story. Here he is. He's going after the big man. And when the Philistine looked about and saw David, he disdained him. He was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you come to me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed God, or cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, come on, and I will give your flesh to the birds. I'll give you first flesh to the birds of the air. I guess he's talking here about the buzzards or vultures and the beasts of the field. Then, and I have this verse 45 highlighted in mine. You don't have to do that. I choose what I want to highlight. Then David said to the Philistine, you come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin. But I come to you in the name of the Lord God of hosts and the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defiled. And this day I will deliver you, or this day the Lord will deliver you into my hand, and I will strike you and take your head from you. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistines to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the field, that all in the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Then all that's assembled shall know that the Lord does not save with sword or spear, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. I think here's a lesson we need to learn, even in our time. We have forgotten the sovereignty of God. God is still in charge. I don't know, I can't answer why God is allowing some of the things that he is allowing. But as we talked about last week, where Isaiah says in Isaiah 55 that the Lord's ways are higher than man's ways, and the heavens are above the earth. I can't judge God. I don't even want to judge God. God knows what He's doing, and He is the Creator, and He, by the Hebrew writer says, He upholds all things by the word of His power, the power of His word. So He's still in charge. What's He going to do today? I don't know. I know in Noah's day, when it got so bad, he destroyed all except 8 righteous people.
Yeah, when Hurricane Katrina came, people were saying that God is punishing the people down there for witchcraft, because they had
and for the when it hit New Orleans was one of the most wickedly immoral cities in our nation.
Mm-hmm. So I told them, I said, well, what about the American government?
Yeah. I've often wondered how long it's going to take for an earthquake the earth to open up like it did before.
I said, nobody can prove that. It's tragic. Nobody can prove that it's an act of God. But, on the other hand, if you want to talk about wickedness, there ain't no organization or agency more wicked than the American government.
That's true.
And the politicians.
It's evil personified.
Yeah.
But Brother Rex Turner, one of my teachers in college, he made this statement, and he said, now don't go out telling that Rex Turner said, I know when the end of the world is coming. But he said, when the world wasn't worth saving, God saved the 8 that were, and He destroyed the rest. When Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't worth saving, He said He would save it for 50 or for 40, then 30, then 10, or 20, and then 10. For 10 righteous people, God would have saved or spared Sodom and Gomorrah. But He couldn't find 10. Actually, it ended up only 3. And then they weren't very righteous after they got out of the city. But nonetheless, He said when Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't worth saving, God destroyed it. He said, I believe worth saving, and the gospel that has been cut down, and when nations will refuse and make laws that to have a Bible or to preach the gospel and to obey the gospel, that you're to be put to death, then you have nobody. You don't have anybody take the word of God. And he said, I don't know if it'll be a year or 10 years at that time, or if it'll be 1,000 years or 2,000 years. I don't know, but he said, I believe that when this old world is not worth saving, God will put me into it. And I think the Bible teaches that, but it just doesn't tell us the time.
Yeah,
it's going to come, and but it's a problem. But we need to understand that the battle is the Lord. In my work, in mission work, I have adopted this thought, and I believe it's a biblical thought. There is no place that we are commanded to go out and convert people. Do you think about that? We're to go out and preach to them.
Mm-hmm.
But there's nothing says that you've got to force them to obey.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what we have to do. Sadly, many in the church are not even doing that to the next door neighbor or in their families or whatever. But when I go out and I teach and I preach, I am in hopes, and I pray that those people will be converted. But I can't convert them if the gospel can't convert them. Then I don't have anything else to offer.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a good lesson here. Some articles could be written on it, that the battle is the Lord's. And then the rest of the chapter, we find that David he killed the giant, and all the men of Israel. We're in verse 52 now. All the men of Israel and Judah arose and shouted and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance of the valley of the gates of Chron, and so on. And David took the head of the 54. David took the head of the Philistines and brought it to Jerusalem. And then when verse 55, when Saul saw David going against the Philistine, he said to Abner, the commander of the army, Abner, whose son is this youth? And Abner said, as your soul lives, O king, I do not know. Now, there's a question here about was Saul in his right mind when he asked this question? Because David had played before him, and he says, who is this person? The slaughter of the Philistines, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistines, and said, Saul said, whose son are you, young man? And I'm the son of your servant Jesse the Bethlehemite. And so that has already been said. But then in chapter 18, I'm moving a little faster because we've got a whole lot of material to cover in this period of time that we have in this quarter. But Saul had a son by the name of Jonathan. And David and Jonathan became close friends. Can you, as you think back, can you think of one person that has been more of a friend to you than anyone else? I had one. I've had lots of good friends, but one that in my younger days, as I was preaching, he was a mentor to me. He was a man that I could go to for get counsel of him of what to do. And brother. I have one brother and one sister, and loved them both. But this man was closer to me because he particularly had my spiritual welfare in mind. And but I later had the privilege, or the job at least, to do. I conducted his funeral. He died, and I conducted his funeral. But this is what we have with David and Jonathan. But now if we took the time to read all of this, some have said that the relationship of David and Jonathan evidently was a homosexual relationship.
Oh, good.
Yes.
That's the first I've ever heard of that.
No, the homosexuals use that, and it's.
Oh, good.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah, when they see where it says David loved Jonathan.
Yeah,
You know.
and then later says that the love that David had for Jonathan was greater than he had for any woman. But that's not saying that he had a sexual love for him, that they were just close friends and brothers.
Magnifying their closeness.
And somebody that takes that and uses it to try to prove homosexuality, they don't have much of an argument. Plus the fact that the Bible says it's an abomination to God.
Yeah.
So it's, but
And
anyway.
when it lasted as king.
Look at David. His life, he was chasing the women.
Yeah.
You think they're gonna leave out if he was chasing the man?
Yeah. Well, that's the problem you have when you try to justify something that is just as wrong as it can be.
Yeah.
But David, by David's friendship with Jonathan, and then by the women, that when David would go out and with Saul and the Philistines, fight the Philistines, and they would come back in. And in verse 7 of chapter 18, it says, so the women sang as they danced and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000. And then verse 8 says, then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him, and he says, they have ascribed to David 10,000, and to me they have ascribed only 1,000. Now what more can he have but the kingdom? So Saul eyed David that they followed. Do you ever hear that phrase that somebody eyed somebody? They kept an eye on him. He kept up to what he was doing. My mother used to use that term quite a bit. And then down in verse 10, that the distressing spirit came on Saul again, and David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, I will pin David to the wall, but David escaped from his presence. And from this time on, there is going to be conflict, and Saul is going to do all that he can to try to get rid of David. If you got an opponent, somebody going to take the kingdom, if you kill him, he can't do it. But it says in verse 12, now Saul was afraid of David because the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. That's a good reason to be afraid. That Saul knew that the Lord had departed from him. And he also knew that David was in favor with the Lord. But in verse 14, it says, David behaved wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. And Saul saw this, and he, in order to try to make a ruse, or at least bring about a situation in which David would be killed, we're told in verse 17, then Saul said to David, here is my older daughter Merab. I will give her to you as wife, only be valiant for me and fight in the Lord's battles. For Saul thought, let my hand not be against him, but let the hand of the Philistines be against him. So David said to Saul, who am I, and what is my life or my father's family in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law of a king? But it happened at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should be given to David, that she was given to Adriel, Meholatite, as wife. Now, so the first daughter was supposed to be David's wife, but it didn't seem to bother David that, and there's nothing said about it, that it bothered David that Saul gave her away. But in the next verse, in 20, now Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and she told Saul, and the thing pleased him. So he says, instead of, since I didn't give you Merab, I'll give you Michal. And the story goes on, and there he, in verse 25, then Saul said, thus you say to David, the king does not desire any dire but 100 foreskins of Philistines to take vengeance of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. In other words, he said, you go kill 100 enemy of the Philistines, and you cut off the genitals and you bring them to me. And David was able to do it. It seemed gruesome, and those were some times that human life and stuff just wasn't as precious. Yeah. So David went and did this, and he brought them back. And Saul, it says here that in verse 28, then Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. And Saul was still more afraid of David, so David became Saul became David's enemy continually. So we find now the next few chapters, next 2 or 3, we're not going to read all of it, but in chapter 19, Saul begins his outright persecution and he tries to get David killed. And each time he does, it's interesting reading, but each time he does, the Lord is with David, and David escapes, and sometimes David is, at one time he was in a cave, I believe it was in Gedi, and Saul came in, and David could have killed him, and David's servant wanted to kill Saul, but David said, no, we're not going to lay a hand on the king's, on the Lord's anointed. And but anyway, we come after 19, we come to chapter 20, and we have David's and Jonathan's love for one another. David in verse, well, David fled from Neroth in Rome, and went and said to Jonathan, what have I done? What is my iniquity, and what is my sin before your father that he seeks my life? So David's asking Jonathan, why is it Saul hates me so? And so Jonathan said to him, by no means you shall not die. Indeed, my father will do nothing either great or small without first telling me. And why should my father hide this thing from me? It is not so. And then David, here we find a statement that we hear at funerals sometimes.
What
But
verse?
What
verse?
Verse 3 of chapter 20.
Oh, okay.
Then David took an oath again and said, your father certainly knows that I have found favor in your eyes. And he said, do not let Jonathan know this, lest he be grieved, but truly as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, there is but a step between me and death. How often do we see this? You know, when are you going to die?
No.
I don't know. I don't know either. I'm 82. Thought I was going to die several times. I may die on the way home. Michael's driving. But I say that facetiously, but there really is but a step always between us and death. I mean, a gunshot. Look at the people in Brussels. Look at the people in Paris.
Yeah.
Who thought they were going to die that day? But they did. And in the schools and the violence that we have, we never know when some idiot, and it doesn't matter what political party they are a member of. Most of them aren't a member of anything. They just want to kill. But somebody just for the joy of shooting you. And again, it's white people shooting black people shooting white people. We just don't know. I don't know when I go to bed at night. I lock the door, but I don't know if somebody's going to break in. I don't expect them to, but it happens. You know,
Yeah.
you read it in the paper all the time. So there is but a death, or there's but a step between death and me. And then in the rest of that chapter, David and Jonathan renew, or they continue their great friendship. And David asked Jonathan to make excuses for him at a certain feast, and make excuses to Saul, or tell Saul why he wouldn't be there. And Jonathan said that he would, but in verse 18 of chapter 20, then Jonathan said to David, tomorrow is the new moon, and you will be missed because your seat will be empty. I've seen bulletin articles on that about, you know, And do y'all sit in the same place when you go to church?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Like a couple of Sundays ago, our seat was empty because we were in Tennessee. And some folks made that statement, well, your seat was empty last week. And, and David, or Jonathan says that to David, your seat will be empty. And then we come on over into chapter 20. I'm skipping some of it. I know you've read it, but in the old verse about 27, it happened the next day, the second day of the month, and David's place was empty. And Saul said to Jonathan, why is the son of Jesse not come to eat, either yesterday or today? So Jonathan answered, David earnestly asked permission to go to Bethlehem, and he says, please let me go. And now, if I found favor in your eyes, let me get away and see my brothers. Therefore, he has not come to the king's table. And the king was angry. Saul was angry and flipped out. And if you remember that text in the Bible, Good News for Modern Man,
Yeah,
it was called, where Saul says to Jonathan, you son of a perverse, rebellious woman. They put that slang phrase that we use. I won't use it, but it's calling a person's mother a dog. So, but they put that in the text. Now, Bible people don't talk like that. Not people inspired of God. Of course, Saul was not inspired, but that would not. I think of the way we got here, you son of a perverse and rebellious woman, and he says he wants to kill. And Jonathan answered Saul and said, this is verse 32. Why should he be killed? What has he done? Saul, what has father or dad, whatever you call it, what has Jonathan done? And that you're trying to kill him. And then at that point, Samuel cast a spear at him and said to kill him, which Jonathan knew that he was determined by his father to kill David. So Saul has just about gone into insanity. And Jonathan arose from the table and went in great fear. In chapter 21, it's David is fleeing from Saul, and he goes to the tabernacle, and he doesn't have any food, and he asks the high priest there to give him food, and the high priest did. And because of this, later the high priest is going to lose his life. But then chapter 22, I want us to go to that and look at it for a little bit. We've got about close to 15 or 20 minutes. It just tells us something about David and the people who followed him. David therefore departed, starting in verse 1, David therefore departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. And when he, his brothers, and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him, and everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was discontented gathered to him. So he became the captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. And then David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother come here and with you until I know what God will do with me. So David is fleeing with his family now, with Saul or with Jesse and so forth, from Saul. So he brought them before the king of Moab, this is verse 4, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. And then we're told that when Saul heard that David and the men were with him, who were with him, had been discovered. Now Saul was staying in Gibeah, and under tamarisk tree in Ramah, and with his spear in his hand, and all of his servants standing about him. Then Saul said to his servants who stood about him, Hear now, you Benjamite, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and so forth? All of you have conspired, verse 8, against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And then verse 9. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul, I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob to Abimelech, and the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath and the Philistines. And the king sent. Now remember, this Abimelech is the high priest. A scratch on my ear and it's bleeding. He let's see. He called them, and Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against the son of Jesse in what you have, in that you have given him bread and a sword, and inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me? And Abimelech answered the king and said, Who among all the servants are as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Then did I begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me, let not the king impute anything to his servant or to any of the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much. The king said, You shall surely die, Abimelech, you and all your father's house. Then the guards of the king said to the guards, Turn about and kill the priest and all of the Lord, and because their hand was also with David, and because they knew when he fled. But the servants of the king would not lift their hand to strike them, or the priest of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, and this Doeg is he's a traitor, You turn and kill the priest. So Doeg the Edomite turned and struck the priest and killed in that day 85 men who wore the linen. And only one escaped, which was Abathar, I believe. But and that well says in verse 20, Now one of the sons of Elimelech, Ahimelech, I'll get it right in a moment, escaped and fled to David, and Abathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abathar, I knew the day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks your life seeks mine, but be with me and you shall be safe. And so we're introduced to Abathar, and Abathar will become the high priest. But later on, when it comes to 1 Kings, Abathar is going to, rather than to cast his lot with Solomon, whom David had said would be king, he cast his lot with Adonijah, another son of David, and later Solomon had sent him home. He took him out of the priesthood and sent him back to his home and told him to stay there. So we have in this portion of the Kings, we just see the exploits of David and how he escapes from Saul, how he spares Saul, and then we come to chapter 25. Again, as I told you before, we do have to move rather swiftly because we've got 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 King, and 1st and 2nd Chronicles, and we've got prophets all over the place in there that have to be dealt with. So we're going to have to go in a hurry. But we come to chapter 25 and we find the death of Samuel. Then Samuel died, and the Israelites gathered together and lamented for him, and buried him in his home in Ramah. And David arose and went down to the wilderness of Chron. And there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich, and he had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats, and he was shearing sheep in Carmel. Now this Carmel here is not where Mount Carmel is. This is in southern Judah, and not too far, I think, from Hebron. But he was there. He was very rich, and he was shearing. Now the name of the man was Nabal. Do you know what Nabal means? We're going to be told here in a little bit, but if you'd have to look it up in a Bible dictionary, the word Nabal means food. His name was Nabal. His wife's name, or the name of his wife, was Abigail. That's a pretty name. And she was a woman of good understanding and beautiful appearance, but the man was harsh and evil in his doings. He was of the house of Caleb. That brings Caleb we know well. Caleb was one of the two of the 180 or 600,000 rather that came out of Egypt that finally went into the land of Canaan. Mm-hmm. And when David heard that, that's verse 4, that heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep, David sent 10 young men and said, go to them, go up to Carmel, go to Nabal and greet him by my name, and thus you shall say to him, who lives in prosperity, peace be to you, peace to your house, and peace to all that you have. Now I have heard, and this is still the instructions for the young men. Now I have heard that you have shearers, your shepherds were with us, and we did not hurt them, nor was there anything missing from them all the while they were in Carmel. While David is camping out in places, they came upon these people. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we come on a feast day. Please give whatever comes to your hand to your servants and to your son David. So when David's young men came and spoke to Nabal according to all the words of the name, in the name of David, and waited, then Nabal answered David's servant and said, who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants nowadays who break away each from his master. Shall I then take my bread and my water and my meat, and that I have killed for my shearers, and give to men who I do not know where they are from? Now he was making an excuse. But notice there's a similarity. In Luke 12, I believe it is, there's a parable of the rich farmer. He said, my fields are brought forth bountifully. I don't have enough room in my old barns to hold it. I know what I will do. I will tear down my old barns, and I will build new barns, and I will put my goods in my new barns, and I will then say to my soul, take thine ease, eat, drink, and be merry, for thou hast much goods laid up for many years. If you look at that parable, there's 13 personal pronouns that the man refers to himself. I, my, and mine. Mm-hmm. Well, that's what this fellow is. Shall I take my bread, my water, my meat, that I kill for my servants? Mine. I'm not interested in anybody else. I'm interested in mine, me and mine, so to speak. So David's young men turned on their heels and went back, and they came and told him all these words. Then David said to his men, every man gird on a sword. Every man girded on his sword, and David also girded on his sword. And David and about 400 men went with David. 200 stayed with the spies. Now one of the young men told Abigail, that would be one of the young men of Nabal's group, told Abigail, Nabal's wife, look, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he reviled them. But the men were very good to us, and we were not hurt, nor did we miss anything as long as we accompanied them and when we were in the fields. And they were a wall to us by night and day. All the time they were with us, keeping the sheep. In other words, they protected us. They kept marauders from coming in and stealing our sheep. Now therefore, know and consider what you will do, for harm is determined against our master, and against his household, for he is such a scoundrel that one cannot speak to him. Then Abigail made haste and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep already dressed, 5 seahs of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and landed them on donkeys. And she told her servants, "Go on before me, I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. She didn't tell him what she was going to do. And she rode on, she came upon David, and verse 21, David said, "Surely in vain have I protected all of this fellow in the wilderness, so nothing was missed, and all that belongs to him, and he hath repaid me evil for good. May God do so, and more also, to the enemies of David, if I leave one male of all who belong to him by morning light." And when Abigail saw David, she dismounted quickly from the donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed down to the ground. And so she fell at his feet and said, own me, my Lord, own me, let this iniquity be. And please let your maidservant speak in your ears and hear the words of your maidservant. Please let not my Lord regard this scoundrel Nabal, for such is his name, so it is. And that's where it tells us in the cross references, his name is, the word Nabal means food. For as his name is, so he is. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent. Now therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, since the Lord has held you back from coming to bloodshed, avenging yourself with your own hand, let your enemies and those who seek harm for my Lord be as Nabal. And now this present which your maidservant has brought to my Lord, let it be given to the young men who follow my Lord. And please forgive the trespass of your maidservants, for the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord fights the battles of the Lord, and is evil and is not found or evil is not found in you throughout your days. And then David blesses her, and in the process, the men go back and they tell Nabal what has happened, and Nabal, he has a heart attack and dies. And so Nabal, or David, then sent word by his servants to Abigail that he would like for her to come and be his wife. And so she does. And verse 40 of chapter 25 says, when the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David sent us to you to ask you to become his wife. Then she arose, bowed her face to the earth, and said, here is your maidservant, a servant to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord. And so Abigail arose in haste and rode on a donkey, attended by 5 of her maidens. And she followed the messengers of David and became his wife. And then it tells us that David also took Ahinoam of Jezreel. So both of them became his wife. But Saul had given Michal, his daughter, David's wife, to Palti, or the son of Laish. And we'll stop there. Now, next week, we're going to finish 2 Samuel, or 1 Samuel, and we're going to move pretty good through 2 Samuel. We're not going to take a whole lot of time because, again, it's David's warring. But in 1 Kings, the first chapter, it talks about David's old and he's dying. And we want to get to that. We'll start here in chapter 26 next week.
Okay.
And you say you'll research that about the evil spirit? Because I've heard that God gave Saul the evil spirit. Because I've heard many, several things from, Saul had manic depression,
Well, I will look in several different places and see what will come up with. Thank you for being here.
Hey, thank you.
See if I can turn this thing on.